the big picture is that inequality is in many countries is still growing. In some is at an all-time high for centuries, and there are many things that explain why this is happening. I mean, one of them is technology. You know, like you can imagine, every village used to have its own band playing, and now Shakira sings for the whole of humanity. You know, so of course Shakira becomes very wealthy and then doesn't always pay her taxes in Spain either, but that leads to some people being much wealthier than others. Then there are other things that happened that became quite clear since the 2007-8 crisis. Some of the people who created the financial mess, they were the ones that had more knowledge of what they have done, and so these people were hired to try to solve the crisis. And in some cases, because some banks went bankrupt and they were reabsorbed by larger banks, then these people who were the culprits, they actually became the directors of a larger organization, and so their salaries went up even more. So there are some ways in which sort of inequalities are being created that are, you know, if you obviously objectionable in their origin, and in other cases maybe you don't see that origin being objectionable in itself, but the inequalities are so massive that the amount of power these people end up having is huge, and it affects other people, because even if your share of the pie gets bigger, if somebody else's share of the pie gets much bigger, that is going to have implications. Not like you try to buy a house and you get outbid, and you know you think you have this good computer where you can do this and that, but somebody else has something even better where he can do everything that you do faster and better and so on. So what other people have the power to influence politics and various other things, so that could also have detrimental effects. So Jerry Cohen was very concerned with all of these phenomena. So when he read that Rawls, that he respected so much, and had written a theory that he admired, and he described himself in the end as a left-wing Rawlsian. No? So he thought, you know, it couldn't be that the same person that has told us all of these other things that I agree with about what a fair society should be, would also be agreeing with economic incentives being paid to some individuals that result in enormous inequalities in society. I mean, some predictions say that national inequalities could become bigger than international inequalities. No? So the trend is very worrying, and some people would say, well, incentives is only one of the reasons for the inequalities. There's inheritance, and there's many other things that maybe we should be paying more attention to than incentives. But even if that's the case, Cohen, or Jerry, as we all call him. Everybody called him Jerry because he wasn't like, I'm the professor, you know, he was always chatting to the guys that sold the groceries. He used to bet them double or nothing in the grocery shop for his shopping, and sort of talk to everyone, so everybody knew him as Jerry. So Jerry said, well, even if it's true there are other sources of inequality, this is very worrying, and I'm very worried that John Rawls himself is saying that this is not unjust. So the way this matter is discussed by philosophers is involves a trilemma, which is not always easy for people to understand what it is. So a dilemma is when you have to choose two things, and a trilemma is where you have three things that you want and you cannot have them all. So the three things that we want freedom of occupational choice, so everybody should be able to be a doctor if you want to be a doctor, or be a hairdresser if that's what they want to be, and so on. We want equality, and we want efficiency. So Rawls says, well, once you grant occupational freedom, supposing you need doctors, how do you attract the doctors or persuade people to become doctors? You can't force them to be doctors. You can't send them to the gulag or put pressure on them or conscript them, as we might be able to do at time of war, where you say, oh, we need somebody to be a nurse here, we need somebody to take these people from here A to B in an emergency, so your vocation is not to drive or to be a driver, but now you're going to drive, no? When we are at a time of peace and in a society that is sufficiently developed and comfortable, we can't really coerce people. So Rawls says, well, I don't see another option but to offer them incentives and pay them more for, to become doctors. This way we have freedom of occupation, we have efficiency because we want them, to have the doctors that we need, but of course we can lose the quality. So something has to give way and we can't have it all. So Jerry was concerned with that, and he thought about it, and he thought he had come up with a solution. And his solution was, if people did not behave like the old Marxists that just sit back and look at history unfolds or see how the social structures change and do nothing, if people were also motivated personally and they endorsed this egalitarian ethos, they wouldn't be going to negotiations asking to be paid more than others, bluffing about how much they don't like the job so that, to get paid more and all of these things. So there would be a reduction in the inequalities that are created in terms of incentives. So that was his proposal, to propose an egalitarian ethos that people are persuaded by, and so because there's just persuasion, they're not being forced, then they will adopt it, and that will solve the trilemma. Of course, that wouldn't solve the trilemma completely, because there will be various inequalities that he grants, like to be a surgeon, for example, you have to train very hard and it's very stressful, so you have to get compensation for the stress and the effort. So some people, he agrees that they had to be paid more, or otherwise it wouldn't be fair, no? If they were paid the same as somebody who didn't undergo any training and didn't have any stress in his work and so on. So he would agree that there are compensations, and then he also agrees that you cannot make people obey the moral law with no concern for their own plans and desires and interest in life. So the people should be able to be selfish to some reasonable extent. So that again is another thing that will create some income inequalities. And some people would not be very persuaded by the egalitarian ethos and so on. So it is possible that the trilemma cannot be solved completely, but I think the important point that he made and remains true is that there's something that can be done, and there will be a difference between the levels of inequality that you get when people have zero sort of personal egalitarian ethos and are just like market maximizers and self-seeking their best salary for themselves and so on another society that already people are brought up and they come to hear about the egalitarian ethos and his arguments, and so concerned for other people who are worse off than them through no faults of theirs, and so they would take this into account in their decisions, and that he hopes would eliminate some of the sources of inequality. So some people say, well, there are lots of objections, no? I can't go into all of them, but some people objection, my best friend Andrew Williams has this objection, is that how do we know what we have to do according to the egalitarian ethos? What is the extent of our duty? But I don't think that is a lethal objection, because there would be things that would be ruled out. For example, In Spain, we have a lot of strikes of pilots. No, pilots are already very well paid, but of course, when the pilots go on a strike in Spain, that depends so much on tourism and trade and so on, it is a total disaster. So they only have to threaten us or intimate that they might be going on a strike, and people are already prepared to surrender and give them even higher salaries. And of course, then the people who clean the aeroplanes or who transport the luggage or do these other things, they would be paid less, no? Because they are the most replaceable, the worse off, the least powerful. So the inequalities would increase. And then you could have a rule like when you already get paid more than most, you shouldn't engage in industrial action to increase your salary further. And that would be quite a precise rule that gets you out of the objection that is just too vague and we don't know. I mean, if you really are among the wealthiest people, like pilots, you are paid in the upper part of the income distribution, then you shouldn't really engage in industrial action to maximize your profits. You might do it for other reasons, like increase airline safety or something else, but not to become wealthier. Or another clear case would be, do not threaten a government with moving out with your company and destroying a lot of jobs if they don't give you a very sweet tax deal. No, don't go around threatening with moving out to another country if they don't, give you everything they want, that you want in terms of environmental regulations or taxation and so on. You shouldn't be making those threats. Or I don't know, people like myself. No, I mean, the people in the UK, I have now left the UK, but I see that people are carrying on having a lot of strikes to improve the salaries of academics. I mean, I just think, I get to teach distributive justice. How lucky can somebody be? It's well, especially in Barcelona, I have a especially good position where, I have a lot of freedom and time for research and other things not everybody has. But even when I was teaching in the UK, I was thinking it's just so nice to be talking philosophy all the time and interacting with the students. It is a job that you get, you're respected, it's creative, you interact with people. So if we don't get paid extremely well, big deal, no? So when you have a job like that, I think that, carrying on insisting on higher and higher salary, it comes to a point where it's also wrong. So we could be like coming up with enough examples that would be ruled out by the egalitarian ethos, that would be sufficiently precise to sort of deal with this objection that is just too general and we don't know what we can do. And the other thing is that maybe it is consistent with egalitarian ethos to go to your interview and try to get as high a salary as possible, but then you go and donate it to a development agency or for the sake of the environment or animals or other things, no? Because that would be also consistent, no? So you could really do the same, go to your negotiation and get the salary and so on. But then the issue is like, what do you do? Do you just consume all of that additional income that they pay you in incentives, or do you put it towards some worthwhile cause, no? So there are many things to learn from the egalitarian ethos that are still applicable and I think overcome the various objections. But the objections are so interesting and there's so many of them. I could be talking about them for many hours.
Yeah, and he did. Like he's got lectures as early as 1992, I think, that you can find on YouTube where he's talking about this. And then his book in 2007, Rescuing Justice and Equality, he's still dealing with that 25 years later. So I mean, it's enormous for sure.
I mean, I tell you what I find the most fascinating, and I never got to publish this because I kept on improving it, and I never sent it out. It is based on 2 pages that he wrote when he realized that he had engaged in something he himself called the strategic contradiction. So he realized that he had advanced some arguments that sounded excellent, like he could refute the Rawlsian objections, and he was doing very well. And he also gave other objections, and then later he came to the conclusion that he had to choose one or the other, but he couldn't hold them both. And that is what happens when, on the one hand, he is saying, don't worry about the egalitarian ethos. It's only an ethos. I'm not planning to coerce people or force them in any way. I'm just going to explain this, and it would be an ethos. And so the idea is that if it's just something that you're persuaded to do, it doesn't conflict with occupational choice. Because, for example, we were talking about animals before. It could be that somebody offers you a very attractive job as a gastronomic journalist. So you get to go to all these wonderful restaurants and try menus and review the restaurants, and you want to take it, but then you realize that you cannot be a vegetarian or keep kosher or halal or whatever. And so you don't take that job. Most people would say that this is not an example of a reduction in occupational freedom, because you were offered the job and then you chose a different one, like recipe editor or something else, because you didn't want to be eating all of that food yourself. And many people would say that, in fact, this sounds like a paradigmatic example of free choice. You were given the opportunities, you have your values, you reflected on it, and you turn it down. So it sounds like he won that battle. And then on the other hand, when he's arguing against Rawls and the focus on the structures and so on, he says, well, yes, you could be telling me that the egalitarian ethos has no room in your theory because your theory is all focused on structures and legal arrangements and institutions and so on. But you couldn't really be saying that if you're concerned with justice, because think about something like the sexist ethos and families where boys get educational opportunities that girls don't get, or where people have a division of domestic labor that is very sexist and unjust. You would have to be against that because you care about freedom, you care about equal opportunities, you care about equality, so you would be against this. And that should be part of the basic structure and the system you want to change. But it's only an ethos. So on the one hand, he's saying, look, the sexist ethos is extremely influential, it's sort of basic structural. So it should be a subject of justice because it has a big impact on people's lives and so on. So when he's trying to persuade the Rawlsians that an ethos like the selfish ethos should be included in the theory. But then on the other hand, when he's saying, no, I'm not coercing people, I'm only proposing an ethos, he's saying, oh, it's only an ethos. So don't worry about it from the point of view of freedom, because it's only an ethos and a belief. I think that is so interesting, that it's interesting for people who are not interested in incentives or anything. I mean, how a belief can make you unfree. I find that very interesting, whether just a mere belief or an ideology that you have, is it possible that a mere belief that with no coercion, no threats or anything can reduce your freedom? I think that is a topic that comes from the discussion of incentives, but has a lot of interest aside from that, no? And I think, in feminism, we have a lot of examples of that, how, just false beliefs can render you unfree. and I thought about, a lot of other cases, like remember in the Abu Ghraib prison where people were hooked to a wire and they were told that if they moved they will be electrocuted, and in fact they weren't hooked to a wire at all, but they didn't move because they believed that they would be electrocuted if they moved. So it was a form of torture that they used, no? So it was a belief that you are trapped can cause you not to try to go out, no? And that I find very interesting, and it still needs to be discussed a lot, whether you can say if something is just merely a belief or an ethos or an idea, could that be coercive and oppressive? And without that, he cannot really solve his debate with Rawls. He needs to sort this out. I don't know what paper of mine you read, but I have tried to sort out this, talking about occupational freedom and how there is a way of solving by focusing on occupational freedom, but I think that doesn't solve the whole thing. There's still the issue of whether a belief can render you unfree. That is still unsolved, and key to the understanding properly his debate with not only Rawls but all the Rawlsians that came on Rawls' side against Cohen when he voiced this criticism.
Yeah. So there's two papers, I think. One of them talks a lot about Andrew Williams' objections. So there is that one. And then the other one talks more about specifically, Cohen and Rawls. And it goes into what Rawls called the worth of liberty, right? So it's got, Cohen's egalitarian ethos, right? Even if for him he's trying to say, okay, look, I'm not coercing anybody because it's just an ethos. For him, that pilot example, right? The paper goes over that and how it relates to the pilots. So the pilots trying to get more money might be sort of coerced by this ethos if they otherwise would have, right? We might say that they're sort of being coerced by this ethos not to pursue more money for themselves, but so the Rawlsians might have a problem with that because the pilots are sort of being coerced, but they run into the issue if they're going to be fine with the pilots pursuing their own kind of market maximization, right? They're going to run into the issue of the people in the bottom, like you were talking about, getting paid less because they already don't have any power, right? There's nothing they can do about it, and obviously that's going to impact their occupational freedom, right? They get kind of stuck at the bottom because if you have no money, you don't have a way out, right? I mean, what are you going to do about it? So there's this thing in Rawls about the worth of liberty, and so the worth of liberty for the pilots is far less than the worth of the liberty of the people at the bottom. Like even if everyone here technically, formally, legally has the freedom of occupational choice, it matters a lot who it matters to the most, right? It's going to be worth different things to different groups of people, and we should. The idea was that both parties could agree that we should actually focus on the worth of liberty for the people at the bottom. We should favor supporting them because it's going to be worth a lot more to them than it would be for the pilots. Was the conclusion of that paper, at least.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could say, supposing that you come to the conclusion that the egalitarian ethos does diminish a bit the freedom of the pilots, because then now they cannot go on industrial action and ask for more money or fewer hours or whatever, with the same lack of concern and freedom that they had before. But compared to people who maybe are the cleaners and they are hoping to save enough so that they can do a training course into stained glass or something and do something else with their lives and come out of not being a cleaner for the rest of their lives. you can compare like, oh, the sort of reduction that is the criticism of the very wealthy pilots on the one hand, and the possibility of breaking out of that profession for the others. In the case of gender is even clearer, no? So of course the ideal is to maximize occupational freedom for the men, is that the women do all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the childcare, all of the organization, so that he never has to worry about anything other than what he wants to do in life, no? Of course, that is the best deal in terms of maximizing occupational freedom for the man, unless he also, wants to include into that, occupying himself with his own children and so on. But supposing he didn't, that would be. And then you are comparing the reduction in freedom that is caused by people talking about gender equality. That, of course, people are going on about saying, what about what about women? What about, people who are like, they wanted to be architects or philosophers, and look, all they do is like cooks, nurses, that's not their occupational freedom. That's not what they wanted to do in life, be cleaning other people's stuff all the time. So you have to weigh the reduction in freedom that men get as a result of the feminist critique, and the huge expansion of freedom that women have gained from that critique, that now they can be astronauts if they want to, no? While in the past it was cooking and cleaning, no? So that was my idea, that if you focus on occupational freedom and the worth that this has for the losers, the current losers, and the possible winners, as in the case of women, that would be a solution. But Jerry himself didn't want to go that route, because when he was writing the book, I am very slow with my papers. I spend decades thinking about, I want to be sure that I'm certain about the conclusion. And I told him, and he said, no, that is a possibility. You're right. You could write that paper. Go ahead. But that doesn't persuade me. He wanted to address the trilemma in a way that wasn't dependent on occupational freedom, because for him it was very important that the cleaners were poor. Not only that the cleaners had small occupational freedom, is that they were badly off. And so my solution of focusing on occupational freedom solved part of a problem, but it didn't address the whole thing completely, because he thought that the fact that the cleaners were the worse off, even if they didn't want to have another vocation or change in their life or whatever, still matters. So he didn't want everything to depend on occupational freedom. He wanted other things like poverty itself or disadvantage to come in the picture. And that's why you need to address the issue of whether belief can reduce your freedom or not, because that is like, I mean, they are the Rawlsians say two things. No, one thing is they say is that, no, well, we are like the Marxists were focused on the structure and the superstructure. Now with the Rawlsians we focus on the basic structure of society, the major institutions, the law, the things that have the biggest impact on people's lives. No, that's what we're gonna focus on. We cannot discuss every single action that an individual takes in his daily life. No, we're gonna focus on the basic structure of society. So that means the ethos is not required. No, it's just not part of a picture, and that's why he comes up with a feminist example and saying, what about sexist ethos in a family? Isn't that also basic structural? And but the biggest Rawlsian objection is the freedom objection, which is for Rawlsians, freedom in developed societies that are where people have acquired some level of development, occupational choice has priority over increases in income and wealth. No? So the priority of liberty, and that is how Rawls puts it. No, the priority of liberty means that what people get paid depends on what other people offer to them if they want them to perform the job. So the priority of liberty is the biggest issue, and whether liberty is restricted by an ideology or an ethos, that is or when, So there are many possible ways in which you can solve this, and some people say, well, an unjust ethos is oppressive, a just ethos is not, or it depends on how reasonable the ethos is, or how, if it's really egalitarian, very strict, then it would be more oppressive. There are, lots of things that people, one can still do with the debate. I don't think it's finished. I don't think anyone has sorted it out. It's still open.